Welcome to the Beyond the Basics Bible Study Podcast. My name is Dan Snyder, and I'm your host. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Beyond the Basics, where we are exploring the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, one chapter at a time. Before we get started, if you enjoy the show and want to help keep it on the air, you can go to my website at beyondthebasics.blog. Click the donate button at the top, and that will bring you to the website for Passion for Life Ministries, where you can make a tax-deductible donation. Passion for Life is a ministry that I've partnered with that is dedicated to spreading the gospel and feeding the elderly in Central and South America. Please make sure you designate your gift for Beyond the Basics. You can also click the subscribe button, which will bring you to my Patreon page. And for only $4 a month, you can receive access to the full uncut episode, which will include between 10 and 30 minutes of additional audio. You will also receive access to all past episodes, starting with Genesis chapter 24. Now, onto the show. Well, have you ever felt completely alone? Think back on those times. How did God meet you in those times when you felt alone? In Genesis chapter 32, we're going to find that in the beginning of the chapter, Jacob is completely surrounded by family and an army of angels. And as we go through the chapter, he's going to slowly become more and more alone until at the end, he's completely alone on the side of the river, and this is where God meets him. So in Genesis 32, verse 1, remember Jacob had been fleeing from Laban. They had made a covenant to never cross into each other's territory, and so now Jacob was returning to the land of Canaan. And God had told him to go back to the city of Bethel, and so in verse 1, it says, Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. So that word angels also means messengers. So in verse 2, when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's camp. So he called the name of that place Mahanaim, which means two camps. There's God's camp, and there's Jacob's camp. In verse 3, Jacob sent messengers before him. Now in verse 3, we find out that Esau is living in the land of Seir, or the country of Edom. So in verse 4, Jacob tells his messengers to say, you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob. Jacob was the patriarch of the family by birthright, but here he humbles himself to be Esau's servant. So again, he's trying to take a non-confrontational tone. He's trying to make it clear that he's not here for a fight. He says, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants, and female servants. So Jacob wanted Esau to know that he already had plenty. He already had great wealth. And he wasn't there to take anything from Esau. He already had enough. He had already taken the birthright when he was younger, and now he was coming back to claim his inheritance, but he wasn't trying to take anything from Esau anymore. So then he goes on, he says, I have sent to tell my Lord in order that I may find favor in your sight. So Jacob wants to make amends here. Jacob knew that he had alienated his brother. He knew his brother was angry. He's trying to make amends. But we're starting to see a bit of a problem here because Jacob already has God's favor. So we shouldn't need to seek Esau's favor. So in verse 6, the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him. This is actually the largest army that we've seen so far in the Bible. In verse 7, it tells us that Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. So Jacob starts to come up with a plan, and he starts to divide the people that were with him. This is a problem because it actually makes defeat more likely against a large army. So moving down to verse 9, Jacob is so fearful that now he is finally driven to prayer. He realizes that he's got no other option left. It's his last resort to turn to the Lord. It shouldn't have been his last resort, but he did it, and he turned to the Lord. We can't really judge Jacob, right? How many of us back ourselves into a corner because of our own dumb decisions? And when we've got no other option left, then we finally turn to the Lord and say, Lord, I don't even know what to do here. Please help. We've all been there. We've all done that. We can't really judge Jacob for this. So he appeals to the God of his fathers. He says, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. Jacob recognized his need for God. He asks God for deliverance. He says, deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said, I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So Jacob here is reminding God of his promises. So Jacob stayed there that night in the place of two camps. And he split up his animals and his family and his servants, and he sent them on in droves to his brother Esau. And in verse 16 it says, these he handed over to his servants, every drove by itself. So this was a large portion of Jacob's wealth. It's almost like Jacob is offering the birthright back to Esau in exchange for his life. So again, remember, I mentioned that it's good for Jacob to tell Esau that, hey, I'm not here to take anything. I'm coming in peace. I just want to go back home. Not here to start anything. But instead, he went beyond that. He made himself Esau's servant. He's trying to earn Esau's favor, and now he's offering his inheritance back to Esau. All these animals that he had gained while he was with Laban, he's offering them back to Esau. So Jacob feared Esau more than he feared God, even though Jacob had God's promises. See, we must fear God more than the world because we have God's promises. 2 Corinthians 7:1 says, since we have these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit, bringing holiness to completion in the fear of God. So what is Paul saying there? He's saying that we have the promises of God. Because we have those promises, we must cleanse ourselves of sin and fear the Lord, because the Lord has power to keep those promises and bring those promises apart. He is infinitely more powerful than anything that the world can throw at us. So let's cleanse ourselves. Let's humble ourselves in front of God and fear God, and not the world. Jacob feared the world more than he feared God. Jacob feared Esau, his brother, more than he feared God. So he said to his servants in verse 16, pass on ahead of me and put a space between drove and drove. And then in verse 20 it says, for Jacob thought, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me. And afterward I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So Jacob is still trying to scheme. He's still trying to manipulate Esau into getting what he wants. So in verse 21, so the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp. In verse 22, that same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. So this right here is about to foreshadow Jacob's baptism. The story that we're about to read is going to take place just before Jacob's baptism. We're going to see a significant shift in Jacob's attitude. We're going to see a significant shift in Jacob's attempt to trust the Lord. In verse 23, it says that Jacob took them, his family, and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. In verse 24, and Jacob was left alone. Over the last 10 verses or so, Jacob had been dividing up his wealth and sending them on ahead of him. Then he divided up his children and sent them on ahead of him, and now Jacob is completely alone. He's completely vulnerable, and this is where God comes to him. Just like the first time that God had appeared to him in Bethel when Jacob was completely alone, fleeing from his brother Esau, now Jacob is completely alone in fear of his brother Esau, and God comes to him. And it's interesting to note the way that God comes to him. See, God comes to us at our level, and God obviously knows that he is far above us in every way. So he humbles himself and approaches us at our level. Psalm 18, verses 25 through 26 says, with the merciful you show yourself merciful, with the blameless man you show yourself blameless, with the purified you show yourself pure, and with the crooked you make yourself seem torturous. And this is shown in the record of Scripture. So in Genesis 18, Abraham was a nomad, and so God appeared to Abraham as a traveler. In the book of Joshua, Joshua was a military general, and in Joshua chapter 5, God came to him as a commander of armies. Jacob here in Genesis 32 spent his entire life struggling with others, so God came to him as a wrestler. And in verse 24, a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. So this man initiated the fight. Jacob didn't start the fight. This man did, and he wanted something from Jacob. What did he want? What did he want from Jacob? He wanted to take his deceiving, scheming, self-reliance from him and turn Jacob into a man that relied completely on God. and he wrestled with him until the breaking of day. So this reveals Jacob's determination. He never gave up. Despite the difficult life he had, he never gave up. He never stopped fighting. He never stopped scheming. He never gave up. And he didn't give up in this fight. But the problem was, he was too reliant on his own strength and cunning. See, I don't think it's a bad thing to never give up. I think that's a good thing. We shouldn't give up. But in that determination to keep going, we should not rely on our strength, because our strength is never going to get us to the end. We have to rely on God's strength and His wisdom. That's what's going to get us through difficulties. So in verse 25, it says, when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, even though he could have at any time, because as we're going to find out, this is God, he could have won this fight at any time. When he saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. It says that he touched his hip socket. And I think this is a strange word to use here. Like, I don't know about you, but I think about if you're going to put somebody's hip socket out of joint, you're not going to touch it and it goes out of joint. You're going to punch it. You're going to kick it. You're going to use all your force that you can muster and hit that person as hard as you can to make that hip joint go out of socket. In my opinion, this is a strange word to use here. He touched his hip socket, but I think there's a reason. Because this is the same word that's used in the story about the ladder to heaven. In Genesis 28:12, it says, he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. That word where it says the top of it reached to heaven, that's the same word here as when the man touched his hip socket. So that ladder was set on earth, and it touched heaven, and now God came down from heaven on that ladder and touched Jacob. So I think that word is giving us a clue that this is not just any man. This is God Himself. It was God Himself that came down. Because there's always ambiguity, right? At least it seems like it, especially if you're reading in the English language where words have been translated and the meaning isn't always completely clear. A lot of times we read these encounters like this, we believe that it's God because that's what we've always been told. But when you read it, you start thinking to yourself, well, maybe, is this really God? I mean, how do we know it's God? And the biblical authors gave us these clues so that we could know, because they wanted us to meditate on it and think about it and pray about it and spend time wrestling with the text, really getting the meaning out of it. I think that this word, touched, is one of those instances where the text is not entirely clear that this man is God, even as we read on. Now, Jacob seems to be convinced that the man is God, but the text doesn't actually come out and say that it was God. But I think that this word gives us that indication, because we read about a ladder that was set on earth and touched heaven, and God was at the top of that ladder. And now a man has come down and touched Jacob. So what did he do? He dislocated Jacob's hip as a reminder of his grace, so that Jacob would go through the rest of his life limping, being reminded of God's grace on his life, of God's deliverance. Paul had something similar in his life. In 2 Corinthians 12, verses 5 through 9, it says, on behalf of this man I will boast, but on my own behalf I will not boast except of my weaknesses. Though if I should wish to boast, I would not be a fool, for I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain from it, so that no one may think more of me than he sees in me or hears from me. So to keep me from becoming conceited, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. So Paul here is saying, if I wanted to boast, I had all sorts of reasons to boast. And the Lord knew it, so he gave me a reason not to boast. He gave me this thorn in the flesh so that I would be forced to rely on God's grace. And that's what's happening to Jacob here. He's now going to be forced to rely on God. So in verse 26, the man said, "Let me go, for the day is broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." This basically encompasses all of Jacob's struggles with others. His brother, his father-in-law. He's always looking for a blessing. Everywhere he goes, everything he does, he's always looking for a blessing. He was looking for a blessing when he took Esau's birthright. He was looking for a blessing when he deceived his father. He was looking for multiple blessings with Laban. This is what his life is all about. He's desperate for blessing. The prophet Hosea gives us a little more insight into this, because it can seem here that Jacob is commanding God. He says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." But he's not commanding God. And in Hosea chapter 12, verses 3 through 5, it says, "In the womb he took his brother by the heel, and in his manhood he strove with God." Talking about Jacob. "He strove with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought his favor. He met God at Bethel, and there God spoke with us. The Lord, the God of hosts, the Lord is his memorial name." So Hosea told us that Jacob actually wept when he was asking God for this blessing. He wept and sought his favor. He wasn't commanding God. He was desperate. He realized all he had left was to hold on to God. And so in weeping and in desperation, he asked God for a blessing because it was his weakness that resulted in the blessing. It was not his strength. Previously, Jacob had attempted in his strength to wrangle blessings out of others. But now, in his weakness, all he's got left is to hold on to God and ask for a blessing. Are we seeking for blessing in life out of our own strength, out of trying to manipulate events, and manipulate life and manipulate others for our own benefit? Or do we go to the Lord in weakness and weeping, recognize our utter lack, say, "Lord, we need you"? So in verse 27, the man said to him, "What is your name?" Jacob had to say, "I am Jacob." He had to be honest with who he was. He had to say, "I'm the deceiver," before God could change his name. Now, obviously, God didn't need to know the answer. God already knew what Jacob's name was. God needed Jacob to know what the answer was. So then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel." Now, the name Israel means he strives with God, or God strives, referencing what Jacob had just done, wrestling with God. It's also going to foreshadow what the nation of Israel is going to do. They're going to strive with God, and God is going to strive with them. There's going to be a wrestle throughout Israel's history, even to this day. But Jacob received a new name from God, just like Abraham did. That implies a new beginning or a new purpose. Just like Abraham had a new beginning when he received his new name, and now Jacob is going to have a new beginning with his new name. As I mentioned, this is right before his baptism, essentially. It's the same event, maybe right after. It's not very clear, but that baptism is the point of becoming a new creation, that passing from death into life. And that's what's happening here. Jacob, by receiving a new name, is now being given a new beginning, a new life. So he says, "Your name shall be called Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed." Jacob won. Jacob prevailed, but he prevailed through surrender. That is one of the most primary, fundamental ideas that we, as followers of Jesus, need to understand. We do not win through strength. We win through surrender. Matthew 16:25 says, "Whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." We only find life through losing our life, through laying down our lives in surrender to God. So then in verse 29, then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. And he says, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." See, Jacob thought he would die if he saw God's face. And in a way he did die. Again, playing off that theme of baptism, in a way he did die, because he was actually given new life. He was delivered. His life was delivered. He was given a new life. And now again, in verse 31, the sun rose upon him, which represents a new day and a new life. All this imagery here in these few verses, in this section of this chapter, is showing that Jacob is a new creation. The creation language of there is evening and there was morning. The passing through the waters. This is all a picture of Jacob receiving new life, of his death and his resurrection, his death into new life. So it says, the sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. And in verse 32, we're told, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket. This is a Jewish custom to remind them of God's grace. It wasn't required by Mosaic law, but they did it anyway, just to remind them of God's deliverance, God's grace on his people. Do you have any reminders of God's grace in your life? Is there anything that you do to remind you of God's grace? I've always grown up in a Protestant church, and I think as Protestants, over the centuries, we've rejected ritual and memorial and tradition. We've rejected those things because they risk becoming stale. But if done in sincerity and in humility, they are a wonderful reminder of what God has done for us. And I think as Protestants, we could use a little bit more of that. But I do think the one thing that we do that's common for all of us as followers of Jesus is communion. This is the one custom that we have that we all do together to remind us of God's grace, the beauty of his sacrifice on the cross. It's not required. We don't need to do it to get into heaven, but this is something that we can do. We should always, always take communion with sincerity, with humble hearts, reminding ourselves of God's grace that has been extended to us because of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. With that said, how does this chapter point to Jesus? Well, there's two ways. The first way is that Jacob approached God based on the covenant he made with Abraham. If you go back to verse 9, when Jacob prayed to God, he said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac. So he approached God based on that covenant that God had made with Abraham. He's saying, God, you are the God of my grandfather. I know you made this covenant with Abraham. I know that has passed down to me. So that's how Jacob approached God. He recognized that this covenant was real, and he recognized that he was part of that story. And we can approach God based on the new covenant through Jesus. The way Jacob approached God is it points to the way that we can approach God through the new covenant. Hebrews 4, verses 14 through 16 says, Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. So the author of Hebrews there is saying, look, we can approach God on his throne with confidence when we need help. And we can do it through the new covenant established by Jesus. So the second way this chapter points to Jesus is Jacob understood that he was dealing with somebody more powerful than a normal human in this wrestle at the end of the chapter. Now, he called this person God. So this is another appearance of the angel of the Lord. It's always ambiguous. The author calls this person a man. Jacob called the person God. And the reason this is important is that this angel of the Lord keeps appearing is because as the reader, especially if we were a ancient Hebrew reader, we're reading them and we keep looking for the answer to man's fallen state. And these patriarchs, they're supposed to bring about the answer. God made this promise to them that the whole world would be blessed through their seed, through their offspring. So we keep looking. Which one is the offspring? Is it Isaac? No. Is it Jacob? No. We keep looking for this answer in these patriarchs, and the unknown to them, the answer keeps appearing to them. The angel of the Lord is thought to be a pre-incarnate Jesus. Whether we can think of him in such a linear way, I don't know. But the point is, it's the revealing of God in the flesh. And that revelation of God in the flesh keeps appearing to the patriarchs. It's happened several times already. We're only in Genesis chapter 32. We've got a whole Bible in front of us. The answer to man's fallen state keeps appearing to the patriarchs. They don't even know it. Just like those men on the road to Emmaus. Jesus was right in front of them. And he got in that chariot and he showed them how all scriptures pointed to him. They had no idea that that man that the scriptures pointed to was standing right in front of them. It's the same with the patriarchs. And that's why we keep doing this. That's why we have this segment on every episode. Because the answer keeps appearing. The answer is always there. The answer was there from the very beginning. So in reflection this week, at the beginning of the episode, I asked you the question, have you ever felt completely alone? And how has God met you in those times? How has God come to you? And at the end of the episode now, I want to ask a related question. What is the value in vulnerability before God? What is the value in being alone and vulnerable before God? Why does it seem like God is able to move so much more in our lives when we're vulnerable and alone and naked before him? Ponder that question. Ponder the value of vulnerability before God. Before I pray, I want to remind you, don't forget to like or click follow on whatever platform you're using. Give the show a 5-star rating. Always very, very helpful to increase the visibility of the show so that more people can hopefully be blessed by this podcast. Share it with your friends. Let your friends know. Let your family know if they're into podcasts. If they are looking for a Bible study to do, this is a great one to start with. And of course, last but not least, always love to hear your feedback and your comments. Go ahead and leave me a comment on the website. Especially those of you who are listening on the radio, you can go to beyondthebasics.blog, leave a comment. So let's pray. Lord, I thank you so much for what you are trying to communicate to your people through your word. Thank you that you can reach us through the scriptures. I thank you, Lord, that just like Jacob wrestled with you, we can wrestle with difficult questions as we read and as we meditate and as we talk to you, as we pray your word back to you. If anyone who might find themselves in that vulnerable state, anyone who might be finding themselves completely alone right now, I pray that you would come and meet them. Pray that you would come and minister to them. Pray that anybody who is finding themselves fearing others more than they fear you, I pray that you would bring them to that state of vulnerability so that they can meet you. Lord, I pray that all of us, I ask that you would give all of us a heart of humility, a heart that fears you and honors you above all else. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next week when we go through Genesis chapter 33. Don't forget, if you enjoy the show and would like to help keep it on the air, go to www.beyondthebasics.blog and click the donate button to make a tax-deductible donation. Make sure you designate the donation for Beyond the Basics. You can also click the subscribe button, which will take you to my Patreon page, where for only $4 per month, you can receive access to an additional 10 to 30 minutes of audio content per episode